Good afternoon. I'm David Hansen, head of the Department of English. Welcome to the Common Read for spring of 2024. Welcome to all of our students here who have found your way to the Kiva, and welcome to those of you who are streaming online. We have some special guests from Sumner High School. Is that you guys over there? Welcome. To our dual enrollment students from Sumner. I want to thank also the Southeastern Writing Center, the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, and Dr. Fontenot, the Dean, and the staff of the Department of English for helping us bring together these wonderful opportunities to meet with our Common Read authors who are being studied with pleasure in all sections of English 101 and 102. Hanif Abdurraqib is a poet, essay, and cultural critic. His music criticism has been published in the New York Times, the New Yorker, and Pitchfork, and many of these pieces are collected in our Common Read text, They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us. He has written 2 books of poetry, The Crown Ain't Worth Much, and A Fortune for Your Disaster. And his most recent books have explored topics such as the influence of the seminal hip-hop group, A Tribe Called Quest, the history of black performance, and his lifelong obsession with football. They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us was named Book of the Year by numerous publications when it was released in 2017, and he's won numerous literary prizes such as the 2020 Lenore Marshall Prize for Poetry, the 2022 Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Nonfiction, and the 2022 Gordon Byrne Prize for Experimental and Innovative Writing. Hanif has been described by one critic as, quote, a 5-tool writer who can, quote, flip from a wide angle to a zoom with ease, delivering vivid, memoristic splashes. His most recent book is There's Always This Year on Basketball and Ascension. During the Q&A, if you'll stand up and ask your question, Hanif then will repeat the question into the mic so that the folks in streaming can hear it. The sign-up sheets are in the back of the room for after the event. And then after Hanif has given his reading and a Q&A, then there can be some selfies and opportunities for selfies and for book signings. So, Hanif, thank you for joining Southeastern.
Hey, thanks everyone. It's so good to be here. I appreciate y'all making some time for me this afternoon. Yeah, and I appreciate y'all spending time with the book. You know, I never wanted to write this book. I never wanted to write a book of music essays. I don't know how much folks know about my work or upbringing, or if this will perhaps inform some of the questions, but I don't have a background in writing like this. Like, I didn't study writing in college. I was very bad in college. I was very bad at high school. In college, I studied marketing, and I only studied marketing. I played soccer in college, and everyone on the soccer team was majoring in marketing. So the plan was we would all major in marketing and then alternate who went to class on what days. So needless to say, I was not great in college. And I began writing late. I began writing much later than everybody else, you know, in my kind of life and cohort of writers. And so I really only wanted one book. I wanted to write one book of poems, and I did that in 2016. And I thought, you know, it came out in the summer of 2016, and I thought that would be it for me. I was happy with that. I had, you know, for the first time in my life, I had a 9-to-5 job with benefits, and I thought, I got to keep this job, and so I can't go off and live a life as a writer. And so this book particularly is a book that notably very much changed my life, but it was not a book that I wanted to write, in part because, you know, my upbringing when it came to music writing was so instinctual. You know, I didn't really follow this idea of, I didn't know how vast music criticism could be, I think, until I kind of pursued it. on my own time, on my own terms. So thank you for spending time with this book. This book is very massively important to my career, and it's also one that I did not think I would ever write in a very material, literal sense. So I'm up for, the questions can be wide-ranging. I think, I'm really committed to the idea that we are multiple things before we are writers or interested in writing, and so we should fulfill all those interests. I'm obviously a music critic by trade to some degree. We can talk about that. My new book is like loosely about basketball, so we can talk about that. I don't know if folks know too much about me, but we talk about sneakers because I'm a big sneaker guy. Anything y'all want, I'm up to talk about anything. We got time, and I'm looking forward to spending it. Yeah, this is always how it goes. Like it's the first one is always the hardest, and then the first one gets out of the way, more people, There we go. Hey. Yeah.
So in the Ballad of Baton Rouge, you talked about coming to New Orleans after Katrina, and it seemed like what really informed that piece was this idea that you wanted to bear witness. It wasn't even necessarily to write about it.
Yeah.
I was wondering how much that sort of informs your writing and your life in general.
Yeah, the question was about the piece, The Ballad of Baton Rouge in this book, which is at least a part of it. It's centered around the Webby and Boosie song "Wipe Me Down," but a part of it begins with kind of me coming to New Orleans after Katrina, and the question was about witness, how important bearing witness is to my practice. I think actually bearing witness is important to my writing practice, but it's important to my desire for curiosity too. It's mostly important to my living, and I think the things that are important to my living filter into my writing practice even without me knowing it. And so I think something that the writer Ross Gay calls close attention, paying close attention as opposed to which means that you can't focus on everything. It means you can't love everything. I think actually, for me, what is important in my pursuit of witness is to know the many things that I just simply cannot be interested in. Like there's a whole lot of stuff that I quite simply cannot care about. And I don't mean that to be dismissive or to cut down the things that other people do care about, but it's a generosity to myself to say, I'm gonna leave that for you and turn my attention very closely to this. And the thing with coming to New Orleans after Katrina, I have folks who were from here. I had friends in community who were from this area, and they had family from this area. And at the time, I was much younger, but at the time it was just quite simply, I came up on the punk scene and the hardcore scene in the Midwest, and there's a real communal aspect to that of no one does anything alone. And I had friends who were coming down to see how their families were, and I said, well, I'm not gonna let you do that alone. And also to be on the ground, I know I'm very much preaching to the choir here for some of you. I know some of you probably were not alive, but some of you certainly were. To be on the ground in New Orleans post-Katrina, history, it was also for me to have an accurate archive of history, because when we look back at what was going on post-Katrina, I don't know if people remember this, but the National Guard was given the green light to shoot and kill people for trying to get food or for trying to get resources. There were no resources coming in, but also if you tried to take like a loaf of bread from a grocery store, the National Guard had a green light to shoot at you, which I don't think history will remember that, but I was witness to it. And so sometimes I think being witness is important to upend the reality that history does not tell a full truth. But also, witness serves as a motivation and a motive for me in everything I do, not just the tragedy, but also the pleasure. I like to spend, I have to spend a lot of time on my pleasures too, otherwise I don't trust the kind of writer I'd be. Yes. Yeah, the question was, since I talked about not wanting to write the book, what made me choose to write it? How did I choose the subjects in the book? It was mostly persistence. So $2 Radio is the publisher that put this book out, and they're based in Columbus, where I'm from Columbus, Ohio. And I had put out my poetry book, and shortly thereafter, an old friend of mine who played in a band with me back in my younger days hit me up and was like, do you want to put out a book? I work for this press now. Do you want to put out a book with us? And I said, nah, Or I think I said, let's talk about it later, thinking that, people ask you something and you say, let's talk about it later, and they don't get back to you, you could just forget about it. But, Brett really got back to me later, a couple times. And eventually, I was not living in Columbus at the time, I was living in Connecticut. And eventually I came home to visit. And he had me go to the $2 radio office, which was literally just the house. It was the house of the people who run it, you know? And that won me over in a way. It was very much this kind of family-oriented thing. And the idea was, we'll put out this book. I'm from Columbus. This publisher's from Columbus. We'll put out this book, and maybe, you know, 100, 200 people in Columbus will buy it. And that felt good to me. It felt good to say, okay, I'll write 2 books. I decided then I'll write 2 books. I'll write a book of poems, and I'll write this book of nonfiction, and I'll write this book of nonfiction because it'll be doing a service to the city I love. Now, in terms of the artist selection, there was no real, you know, a couple of these things have been previously published. A couple of these things were a little bit older. But there was no, I was just kind of in pursuit of my curiosity at the time. There was no blueprint for what this could be. You know, it was kind of just a collected essays thing around music. So I could have done whatever I wanted, and that kind of freedom was exciting to me. So yeah, there was no real blueprint. I was just chasing the things that excited me. Yeah.
So you described your college career, and then kind of skipped forward to writing books of poetry.
Yes.
How did you go from college to basically teaching yourself the nuts and bolts of writing poetry?
Yeah. Kind of. Well, I was a music critic. I was a music critic before anything. So after college, the thing about, at least back then, because now I feel like the zine as a form, like music zines and shit like that, is having a revival, and everybody wants one, and everybody's excited about it. But back then, zines, you know, if you're on the punk scene, people wanted zines, but no one wanted to write in them. People just wanted them, you know. And so I started writing kind of as a service to, you know, because otherwise we would, you know, we'd have great artwork and people printing out these expensive zines at what was then Kinko's. But I was like, yeah, write in these things. And so I wrote, you know, like show reviews, album reviews, just little stuff to have language in there, because the zine also was kind of a connective point between all the Midwest. And so I was on the punk scene in Columbus, but zines would come in from Chicago, from Detroit, from Dayton. And so, you know, I came out just writing album reviews of local bands. And then eventually I started writing album reviews for local and regional papers, Columbus newspapers, Pittsburgh newspapers, so on and so forth. And the thing that happened around 2010, 2011 was that my reviews and my pitches stopped getting picked up because editors began to complain about my writing being too quote-unquote poetic. But I didn't know what that meant. I didn't go to school at a time where I was taught poetry. I didn't know anything about living poets. I didn't know living poets really existed. And so, really, and so I didn't really take that as an affront. I figured it was an opportunity for me to figure out how to write poems effectively, you know? And so what I did was the same thing I did as a kid. I grew up in a house with a lot of records and a lot of physical musical media. You know, I'm the youngest of 4. My older siblings had like cassette tapes and CDs. My parents had records. And I used to do this thing when I was a kid, because I spent a lot of time alone with music, being the youngest. I used to do this thing when I was a kid where I would flip to the liner notes of a cassette tape, for example, and then circle all the samples, or like highlight all the samples on a piece of paper, and then go to my parents' record collection and then find the original sample in the record. So I did the same kind of thing with poetry. I got a poetry book I loved. I flipped, the first one I ever got was Gabrielle Calvacaressi's The Last Time I Saw Amelia Earhart, and I flipped to the back of the book, the acknowledgement sections, and I circled all the poets I found, and then I just went out and found their books. It was the same process, because it was kind of like, if this poet was influenced by these poets, then I want to read these poets. And the liner notes, you know, liner is kind of in the same language ball as lineage. Liner notes are where you, or you know, acknowledgments are where you find a lineage. So I started getting Adrian Matika's book, so I know it's here. I got the second poetry book I ever got was the Adrian Matika book, Mixology. And then I worked my way back to Gwendolyn Brooks and Robert Hayden and Audre Lorde. So I was building like a lineage, and I just taught myself how to read poems first. And then I taught myself how to write poems, and then I was fortunate enough to be in Columbus at a time where there was just a really robust open mic and poetry slam scene. So through that, I taught myself how to read poems out loud. And yeah, that was kind of the springboard for me. So by 2015-ish, late 2014, to early 2015, I was working on that book. I was working on Crown Ain't Worth Much. And that was really gonna be it, yeah. Yeah. The cover, the questions about the cover. Yeah, the cover, I'm not really a child of the 80s. I mean, I was born in the 80s, but I grew up in the 90s. So, but there's this great image of LL Cool J in an Adidas tracksuit with the giant gold rope chain during the promo run for his second album, and I love it. And we couldn't use that, obviously, but I was like, yo, wolves look cool. You just put it like just superimpose a wolf onto that. And also the first cover, my first book cover also had a wolf on it, and I kind of wanted to have this continuity of wolf covers, and so it made sense. The first three covers of my books have wolves on them in some way. And so yeah, this is like I don't know, this is a cool one. I'm really passionate about all my book covers. I spend a lot of time helping design them, but I think this is a special one. Yeah. Yes.
As a writer myself, I face a lot of discouragement and flack from people who tell me you just shouldn't do that. If you faced any discouragement yourself, how do you push past that?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think especially early on, because the way that people often think about writing, and I don't know do you face pushback from other writers or people who don't write? Right. That's yeah. That's what I was about to say, because people are thinking about the way people think about writing. I think is through this very capital-based lens of will this make you money, or can you have a life? But they're not actually thinking about it through a creatively based lens, which is how will your writing feed the other parts of you that you need to survive and live well? And that is an answer that you have internally that no one else has access to. Even if you were to explain it to someone, they wouldn't have full access to it. And that means that, at least for me, because I would get that too, and like you don't write to, for me, I was never writing to be published or quote unquote famous or I was writing to pursue an understanding of the world through language that helped me move through it more effectively. And to detach that from this notion of I need to write to earn money or I need to write to have a quote unquote career is really freeing, even if a family member doesn't understand that because they're thinking, how will you survive? But the reality is you're surviving well because you are, hopefully you're surviving well, somewhat well, because you are in pursuit of an artistic practice that allows you to see the world clearer. That is, to me, more beneficial than career chasing when it comes to writing, because that kind of thing just falls into place when it does or it doesn't, but it doesn't matter because you have figured out a way to feed yourself and nourish yourself that has nothing to do with a 9-to-5 job. And I think that alarms people in some ways. I think that concerns people because, I'm not speaking to your family specifically, I don't know them, let's be clear. But I think that alarms people and concerns people because, at least I will say in my case, I think it concerned people because they maybe were not able to find that for themselves. And perhaps they feel it's too late. But it isn't, actually. Everyone can become a writer at any point, but I think becoming one now or being one now for you is incredible. You got a head start. Yeah. I'm sorry, what? One album that inspired me to become a music critic? That's a great question. I don't know if there's just one, but I will say this. When I was a kid, I never got asked what I thought about music. I often got asked what I heard, and that's a different question, right? And so, like, for example, I remember hearing Public Enemy's Nation of Millions when I was really young, which is I don't know if people know that record, but it's a very jarring sonic out, it's just a lot of noise. A ton of samples falling on top of a ton of other samples. And I think that ignited a curiosity in me because I didn't know what a sample was until that record. And I thought, man, if you could, I was very young. I was like, if you could take a bunch of sounds from all over these other things in the past and put them in the present and have it sound like that, I want to know what the anatomy of that is like. I want to see that deconstructed. So much of my criticism, my interest in criticism is simply, I want to break something apart and see what's at the root of it, at the core of it. And so I would say maybe Public Enemy's Takes a Nation of Millions to hold us back because, or Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys, those two are really like core things for me where I remember having a response to them that made me curious enough to want to get to the bottom of what they were doing. And that to me is what criticism is. I think we fail when we think about criticism as a place for someone to be an expert and not for a place for someone to be curious. I think so much criticism now is approached by people who want to impose their will upon people, upon other people, other listeners, when instead I think a useful approach to criticism is attempting to approach it as a fan who's curious, who's eager to figure out for their own selves how this music is moving them, and to offer to the public an opportunity for them to feel moved, not in the same way you are, but perhaps in a similar fashion. So those two albums, I think, started that process for me. Yeah. Yes?
You mentioned Adrian Matika, and I think Eve Ewing wrote review of your work. Do you think you would ever do a graphic novel?
Like a graphic like Adrian just did with the boxing thing?
Yeah, it feels like it.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Would I ever do a graphic novel? I'm going to say no, but only because I'd be bad at it. I think, like, I love Adrian. I love what Adrian just did. And of course, Eve is like doing comics in the world all her own. The only thing that saves me is that I take risks within the container of work that I know I can do, for sure. But I don't take risks when it comes to, like, I know what I'm good at, and if I venture outside of it, you know, like people are always like, have you tried writing fiction? It's absolutely not. Absolutely not. I'd be awful at it. Now, I do feel I could get closer to pulling off a graphic novel. Like Adrian, I talked to Adrian about that novel. He's like, oh, it's so easy. Like the art does all the work, which cannot be true. That simply can't be true. I've read that thing, and the language is doing a lot of work, and a lot of brilliant work. But I do think that there is, like I wrote a kid's book, and then when you write a kid's book, the artist really does do all the work. Like my kid's book is maybe 1,200 words total, if that. And the artist is very literally doing all the work. But a graphic novel requires, I think, story and world building that I couldn't get close to. At least not now. Who's to say? Yeah, my writing life may change in a million ways before the end of my life, before the end of this year even. Yes?
Essay in the book that you had a particularly difficult time getting it to come together the way you wanted it to?
An essay in the book that I had a hard time getting it to come together the way I wanted it to. Yeah, the Johnny Cash thing, the Johnny Cash Migos thing, was a little challenging. It was challenging to get that parallel to land the way I wanted it to, and I think if I could write, I think it came out well. I'm thankful for writing it the way I did. If I could write it again now, I would write it differently. But that's how it should be, I think. You know, you should be able to look back on the things that you did and say, I'm thankful that I fought through that idea when I did, and now I have the tools to write it better. But I will say, I mean, I think also there's another one. Yes, the Black Life on Film one, I think that the scope was a bit too narrow. I think I would have broadened that scope to at least include more films or include more examples or include more of an emotional arc. But all these things, you know, around the edges, but broadly too, like my ideas on some of these artists has just changed. You know, like I don't think I wouldn't write the Chance the Rapper essay now, today. I don't know if I would write the Serena Williams essay the same or at all now. This kind of stuff, you know, but that's all your work. I always tell younger writers that their work should age poorly. It's a compliment to your growth if your work ages poorly. And that doesn't mean you should be ashamed of it. And to the contrary, you should have immense gratitude for having grown enough as a writer to look back on your old work and say, I think I would do that differently. I think that's a real occasion for gratitude. Yes. Yes. Okay. So in the essay, My First Police Stop, the question is if the police would not have found my student ID, do I think the situation would have been navigated differently? Sure, certainly, but I also broadly think that I don't know if there's a way that could have been navigated differently that would have changed the motivation for the essay. Because in part of what the essay was trying to do was to say, I was a person who had, you know, we all have a right to be in the space. So I'm saying, like, I was paying to be a student in this space. And still, even with that, I was an outsider in this place. An outsider in a place, too, that in that circumstance was not far from the place I grew up. You know, that suburb is like 6 blocks from my dad's house, you know? And as people know, when it comes to cities, you can wander 3 blocks in any direction sometimes and go from being welcome to being a target. And I think that was kind of the motivation of the essay, was to complicate this thin barrier between being beloved and being a target. Yeah. Yes. Which essay would be my favorite in here? I really loved the Ballad of Baton Rouge. I really thought that was good. I felt really proud of that. I was very proud of Bruce Springsteen, the Bruce Springsteen essay. And I found myself, you know, Fall Out Boy Forever is a big one. That one I wrote in about 2 hours. And I was really happy with how it came out, and we kept it kind of the same as it was. You know, I wrote it in 2 hours, and that draft was that draft, and that went from like draft to book pretty quickly. And so I was proud of these things, and I think I'm proudest of them because it's a testament to how much time I spent thinking about them before I put them on the page. So much of my writing process is interior. I spend a lot of time in thought, and part of this is because I'm an anxious person, and I always think my ideas are bad, you know? And so I spend a lot of time convincing myself that the idea is worth pursuit. But in the process of that, you talk yourself into a structure on the page. You talk yourself into how the work's going to look. And that makes it so that when you sit down to actually do the work, it feels kind of like a breeze in some ways, or there's a level of ease to it, or a level of comfort to it that I think showed up in those few pieces. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. How it's something about the Ric Flair essay, and how did I kind of keep it all contained, really, all the themes contained? Because you know, like setting out on the path of that essay is a good example of the way my brain works. In that, I was trying to get at a greater point about even framing Ric Flair putting Ric Flair in a conversation with rappers, right? Means that what I'm attempting to do is build upon the question of survivability. Who gets to survive where? And if we make it out of something, what that does to our brains, our egos, the way we approach our work. And so the Ric Flair plane crash and the way that he's changed his whole persona post-plane crash felt not dissimilar to me. Like I came up in, you know, I was like young in the 2000s, and I remember 50 Cent. I remember when 50 Cent first came out. You didn't really hear about 50 Cent as a rapper at all. You heard that he got shot 9 times and survived. So you heard about 50 Cent first as this indestructible being, you know? And that actually carried his first album more than anything on the album. So it seemed appropriate to me to kind of put Ric Flair through this lens of he survived something and then became someone else. And that actually does not separate him that far from the world of rap or the people the dudes on my block who I grew up with who got shot at and survived. This whole ethos of, this whole idea of you survive and then you make yourself into something so large that can't be killed, you know, that feels very in line with rap music mythology. And so I was chasing that idea. And inside of that idea, I could kind of, you know, to say I'm balanced, it's kind of like a road. To say I'm balancing these 4 ideas means I have a 4-lane highway. You know what I mean? And I can swerve freely in and out of those 4 lanes, but I can't cross over the median. And I know what those 4 lanes are. In this essay, it was immortality, rap, wrestling, grief. Those are the 4 things. And I could weave in between those things all I want, but I can't steer too far off the highway. So it's really giving myself parameters, or giving myself wide parameters where I can be really flexible. Yeah, thank you. Yes.
Speaking of lanes, I know you talk about it in terms of that one essay. Do you have lanes that cross the entire book? Since the book, touches on so many different topics and artists and things like that, do you see some through lines that unifies the whole work?
Yeah, I mean, place, my big topics, themes, I guess, not topics. My big overall themes are place, devotion, and grief. Place is a big one. I mean, I write about Ohio a lot. I write about Columbus a lot. I write about what it is to be from a place and to love a place. And I feel like that's evident. That's really highly evident in this book is, being from somewhere and loving it and not wanting to leave it, which, I come from a place where a lot of people exit, especially because I'm from a place that's a big college town. Like Ohio State is there, and it's really transient. A lot of people come through Ohio State and then leave, or a lot of people come to go to Ohio State and then leave. And it's really cool to say that I'm going to dedicate at least part of my work to what it means to want to stay somewhere. Yeah. My current definition of hope? I don't know. I sometimes think I don't really, I'm not as propelled by hope as I am by honesty these days. I require honesty more than I require hope. But I work with about 7 to 9 young writers, like high school writers, Columbus City School students at home, all voluntary. We meet up one Sunday a month, and we workshop each other's poems, and we talk about poems. They workshop my poems with the same rigor and intensity that I workshop their poems with. It's like a requirement of the space. There's no hierarchy in the room. It's not like I'm not a parent, I'm not a teacher. We're just gonna work on each other's, we're gonna work on each other's shit and then like keep it moving, 3 hours a month. And I think there's a level of ferocity and intensity that happens in that room. Like in my new book, for example, those like that group of 17-year-olds edited some of these pages. You know what I mean? Would want no credit for that. Would want to not like have me say that now, or would not want an acknowledgement in the back of the book. But a group of teenagers edited some of the pages of this book that is now in the world. You know what I mean? And they did it not because they want to have notoriety. They did it because that's what we do. They bring me work, and I pick it apart, and we talk about it. I bring them work, they pick it apart, we talk about it. It is hopeful to me that there's a cross-generational relationship wherein I can take my work to someone much younger than me, and they are looking at it without irony or without without any kind of, without any kind of self-motivated or selfish approach. And they're saying, I require you to be a good writer because I want to be a good writer, and we're in this room writing together. That to me is about as hopeful as my life can be right now, I think, in that little window of time, because it is showing me that there is potential for my writing to keep growing, and I don't need to dismiss people younger than me or because they're not published anyway, that type of shit. Like, we're all writers in the room, and we hold each other to a standard, and standard setting is a collective action, which means that I need to live up to a standard not just for me, but for everyone there, and everyone there has to live up to the standard we set, and we have to get each other there together, and that is a hopeful practice. Yes. Oh, you, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, June Jordan is a massively important poet for me. Adrienne Rich, Mary Oliver is massively important to me. She's from Ohio, an Ohioan. Rita, though she's not classical, she's still alive, but Rita Dove, who's like a generation older than me or so. And in terms of contemporary poets, I mean, I was really lucky because I came up, through Poetry Slam at a time when I think some of the best writers alive were writing and performing. So Dinesh Smith, Kaveh Akbar, Eve Ewing, Franny Choi, Sam Sachs, Cameron Awkward Rich, all these folks. And they became friends and peers. And much like I was just talking about in terms of standard setting, we held each other to a really high standard in our work, This was at a time when I think Poetry Slam was being derided kind of broadly in writing circles and in writing settings. And so this idea was that all of us who were participating in this, we could perform, but we couldn't really write, which is so bizarre to think about now that someone would suggest that Dinesh Smith can't write, But that is what it was. And notably, Abby pointed out that a lot of people participating were like young poets of color, so that was also a point of that derision. And so we had to hold each other down in a way. We had to kind of lift each other up and rise to a standard that says we don't really care to quote unquote prove these people wrong. We would like to be good for each other because we are all we have. And those are still to this day, these are the people who define my work and who push my work. And I'm always asking myself the question of have I done the best I can do for the people I love? And these are the people I love. And I feel really lucky to be still writing alongside them. And I feel very lucky whenever I get to read some new work of theirs because it brings me back to my own work with a new level of ferocity and clarity. Yes?
You talk about standards in the industry. I wonder, you have such a wide variety of different mediums that you pull from and things that you appreciate. What are your standards for yourself as an artist as well as your standards for other artists? Are they the same?
I try not to hold other artists to a standard because I think that can be, I know what my standards are in terms of what I'm interested in. And so I suppose I hold art to my own personal standard of how long can I engage in this kind of thing. But I don't expect other artists to kind of, a great thing with this is, or a way I think about this is always with music, because I'm a music fan first. And there's just sometimes I've loved the band for a long time, or I love the artist, or I love the rapper, or whoever. And then they just start making music I can't really, the albums get worse and stay worse. And then I have to decide, okay, well, I had my time with this artist. It was cool, I had a good time. Now it's time for me to move on, and that artist means something different to an entire new group of people, and that's fine too. That's kind of my standard with art I consume. I don't want to I would hate to say, well, this artist needs to start making albums again that I love. That seems a bit selfish. But in terms of my own standards, I think most importantly to me is that I understand very clearly that I'm operating within a lineage, whether I want to or not, you know what I mean? And I do want to, not just of the living poets I just named and love, but I'm an Ohioan and a writer and all these things. And so for better or worse, I'm in the lineage of Toni Morrison, I think for much better for me. But to know that means that my standards have to be, I don't want to let down the people who've come before me, and I don't want to let down anyone who might stumble upon my work and then want to pursue their own. And so there's a commitment to being good, but not for any kind of selfish pursuits. I would like to be good for the lineage that I am in and the lineage that I don't know exists yet. Yes? How has this book helped me grow as a writer? I wrote the bulk of this book in about 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. I went to Provincetown, Massachusetts in the winter, which is it's a beach town, so in the winter no one's there, and it gets dark really early, and it's getting dark at 3:15. And I wrote it kind of in a 2.5 week window, and that wasn't the healthiest process, And it was a process of immense suffering, I felt like. And so I think the one thing I learned from this book is I just don't really want to suffer to make things. I don't really want to suffer to make art. It just doesn't really serve, no matter how good the art ends up being, because you're attached to that art forever. And if your memories of the making of that art are all memories of suffering, and you make something that a lot of people love, then you have this kind of misalignment with the work and how people are responding to it. And so I think this book taught me one thing, and the big thing it taught me was how to write differently, how to approach the work differently. In terms of pros and cons, I mean, it does go without, for me, it goes without saying that this book actually very literally changed my life. You know, we thought this book would, you know, the first printing of this book was like 500 copies. Because we thought, you know, like a few hundred people in Columbus or Ohio broadly will buy it, and that's cool. And I was cool with that. I was completely satisfied with that idea. And then that didn't happen. Though it did at first. I will say it did at first. This book, you know, the first like 3 months of its life, that was going according to plan. And then it just didn't. I don't know why. I don't know what made it not do that. But the book has had like a very long, massive life. It's cool to talk about it here. You know, it's is it 6 years old now? It's like 6.5 years old, you know? And I feel like a lot of writers don't get to have a book that lives that long. And so I'm thankful for it. I don't know if there are any cons or, you know, you do sometimes become, because this is the first book of mine that got very noticeable and noticed, I think people do kind of, if you don't pivot quickly enough, if you don't keep writing different books and more unique books and more expansive books, you could easily get pigeonholed as like the music critic guy. So this isn't a con, but I have been felt forced to, and joyfully forced to, keep pivoting and keep making books that are different and more challenging every time out. Yeah.
You said that you wrote this in 2 weeks. What else have you been doing to like make your own books? Like how do you go about it?
How'd I go about
Making your own books.
Oh, well, it's never on my own. I mean, you know, like publishers always have a big hand in the process of actually like putting out the book. But in terms of, you know, like everything just starts out as a blank Word document eventually, and then eventually it becomes something. And I love the process. I really do love the process. I love the process of knowing that I started with an empty page, and at some point, somewhere, be it 2 weeks or 2 years, there will be tens of thousands of words on, you know, there will be a starting word and an ending word, and in between, I hope there will be more good words than bad ones. I love that. I just love the idea of that. I love the idea of the routine. I grew up playing sports. I grew up playing basketball and soccer, and both of those sports are very repetitive, you know, the routines are repetitive. And I love getting in a good groove. I've always loved that. I love returning to something. I love practicing free throws. These kind of things, they really allow me to, like, I'm the same kind of writer as I am athlete, I think, in that way. Yeah. Hey. Yeah, you know, writer's block is real. I don't want to, you know, but also I think that the question of writer's block is about putting words on the page, right? It's a question of putting a product on the page. That's one part of writing, but the reality is all of us have to be multiple things before we can produce art well. For me, I have to be a good son, sibling, dog parent, I guess. I don't like the word dog parent, but for lack of a better word, let's say dog parent. I have to be a good person invested in my curiosities, all that. And if I'm not writing well, to me that signals that one of those things is not being fed. And so, for example, if I am stuck on the page, I am wondering, maybe I have not been a good brother today or this week. And I call my brother, and through a conversation with my brother, it unlocks something that makes the return to the page easier. It would be almost treasonous to not call that a part of the writing process. So it is flawed, I think, to assume that our writing process is only the act of creating a product. Our writing process, I think, stretches across an entire life that, if lived well, allows us to return to the page easier. Now, this isn't to say that if you have like an assignment from a teacher, you can come in the next day with nothing on the page and say, well, I took a walk, so I did some writing. But I am saying that in your creative life, it serves us to ask ourselves, who am I if I'm not producing words on a page? And how does all those aspects of who I am allow me to return to the page with a lot of ease? And how can I feed those things with a level of consistency so that I am eyes open, heavily into the world, and it is responding to me and allowing me something, offering me something in return that I can bring back to the page. Oh, yeah, yeah.
You talked about a lineage with poets. Is there a music critic lineage? Do you have favorite music writers?
Yeah, Bangs and Marcus, Lester Bangs and Greil Marcus. Yeah, Greil Marcus is, and of course, Greg, I mean, one of my early mentors is Greg Tate, the late Greg Tate. And Greil has always been so good to me in my career, even though he's kind of grumpy and grumbly. But I think if you're lucky, you have mentors who like cross a wide range and a wide spectrum, and Greil is like kind of like grumpy grandpa in a way. But yeah, he means a lot to me, and Greg Tate meant a lot to me, and Lester Bangs, I think, was the first book of music criticism I read and loved was the Carburetor Dung Lester Bangs book, which, you know, some of my, and it's, speaking of stuff that hasn't aged well, I mean, some of that shit hasn't aged well, sure, but some of that stuff, like that profile he did on The Clash, it's so vibrant and vivid, and he's not explaining to you who The Clash are. You know, what I love about the music criticism I read when I came up, like reading music criticism, was like, a lot of these critics were not explaining the things to you. They weren't explaining things to you. They were writing to you as though you already loved the thing that they were talking about. And that was impressive to me. It taught me how to work against explanation. Yeah. Anyone on this side, my man over there is like in a crisis. He's like in an emotional crisis. Yeah. Yeah. What was the last part? I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, yeah, certainly. Most of it. But there's stuff that I think we won't understand or get. You know, I sometimes I feel like I grew up in like one of the golden eras of black sitcoms, you know? Like Living Single, Girlfriends, these type things where like a lot of black women were on TV in roles that were not, where they were, not to knock Martin, well, who gives a fuck? Yeah, sure, whatever. Show's old. But like on Martin, like a sitcom like Martin, so often the black women were just kind of like fodder for jokes, you know what I mean? And I rewatched, you know, recently while I was just getting ready for book tour and chilling at the house, I was rewatching Living Single. I was like, yeah, it's kind of aged well. You know, talking about something that's aged kind of well. But at the time, if you go back and look at the way people were writing about and talking about Living Single at the time it was out, it wasn't really appreciated in that way, you know? And so I do think, not only do I think, yes, there is black media right now that would benefit from rigorous critique, thoughtful critique. I also think that as we go down the line and critics look back on some of this shit, you know, like I think, for example, Atlanta, I am wondering what the response to Atlanta will be like in 5 to 10 years if people revisit it. Because if I'm being honest, I loved, say, season 1 of Atlanta, and then it seemed to kind of rev its engine a lot. But I think black art and black art makers, sometimes it's just like people are so hungry for this idea of genius, which I don't. Toni Morrison talks about the perils of acting as though black genius is rare. Because when you act like black genius is rare, it's a real enemy to accountability. Because you are afraid to say, this maybe isn't as good as the other, or you're not even afraid to say that, you're afraid to critique anything because you are worried about how the broader world, will react to that genius, as though black folks do not have conversations about the art all the time. And to say, we can't critique this because we're afraid of what the world thinks is another way to act against what Morrison's center point was like, you don't sacrifice anything for the gaze of anyone who is not our people. And so that is also, it bothers me to still see that flaw in music, in film, in television, but also I think there's a real expansive sense of what black art can be, and I think that's cool. Even if I don't like everything, you know, like it's been cool to see people take risks, and there's been a lot of risk taking, and at the same time, unfortunately, we're just losing critics by the day, and so there's no real landscape upon which this art can be revered and talked about intelligently. But I think that'll change, and at that point, I hope this stuff is revisited well, for sure. Yes. I mean, probably it does. Yeah, so I'm a runner, so I run a lot. I run a whole lot, too much. And I'm sure that helps with writing. I mean, I mostly run at this point because it just helps with my mental aspect of being alive. Like, you know, I feel like I need some time and space. I need like 2 hours that are just mine to be in my own head and like not have my phone on me, that kind of thing. So yeah, I run like 8 miles 5 times a week, and then on Sunday I just kind of leave. I do what I call like a Forrest Gump run, where I just like leave my house and start running until I decide to go home, you know, and I don't clock the time, whatever. And I'm sure that I do some generative work on these runs, but I don't know. I still play basketball with some regularity. I haven't played soccer in years, so I don't know if anyone here plays a sport, but to play a sport in college, for me, it was like, it dismantled everything I love about the sport. You know, I haven't played soccer in so long. And so, yeah, I mean, I do think I stay active and physical and all these things, but I don't know how much it serves the writing. I think it keeps my brain healthy, which ultimately serves the writing, but it's not like I'm being very generative when I'm on my runs. Like when I'm on my runs, I'm not mapping out pieces. I'm mostly doing what my brain always does. It's kind of wanders and meanders and dives into obsessions that don't really serve anything, but, you know, or it does the kind of thing we do where we, you know, I don't know if anyone here is a runner, but at some point in your run, you have to just start thinking of things to distract from the fact that you are running, you know? Yeah. Yes. Always have to. Yeah. I don't know how. I mean, I know a lot of people don't, and I get it. I'm not judging, but for me, I need some kind of rhythmic soundtrack for sure. I don't listen to music when I write. I don't, you know, but running, I think I run too long to just be only my own thoughts, to the point where there's sometimes I go on runs and like my phone will die or whatever, and that's frightening. You know, it's like, oh man, I got 2 more miles where I'm just like thinking my own thoughts. That's not a good look. Yeah, I have a massive running playlist that I started in whenever Spotify first came out, so like 2010, 2009 or something. And all it is anytime I think about a song where I'm like, this would be a good song to run to, I just add it to the running playlist. So now the running playlist is like thousands upon thousands of songs long, and I just shuffle it. The problem with that is the songs on the playlist reflect where I'm at in where I was at in my life when I put them on the playlist, and so the shit is like all over the place, unfortunately. Every year I'm like, I'm gonna delete that running playlist and make a real focused one, but that's too much work, and I'm lazy, so it hasn't happened. Yeah. Do I ever read my work from where? Yeah. Not usually. You mean like, do you mean like, do I read it in front of people? Oh, no. Goodness. Like at the crib? No. No. That's a good question though, because it's true, like in other artistic mediums, like you hear rappers listen to their own shit, you know what I mean? Like in the house. To me, that makes sense. I get why they do it, but it would be, nah, sitting at home reading your own, well, that's crazy. I can't imagine just my feet kicked up at my house reading my own books. Nah, it's wild. Honestly, it's wild to the point where when I finish a book, I leave it, like I'm on book tour now for my new book, and people will be talking to me about something they read in the book, and I'm like, okay, what page is that on? You know, because for me, like when I finish a book, when I turn it in, when it comes out, I'm away from it for so long. That's the other thing too. It takes a long time from when you finish a book for it to come out. So I finished writing this book in like over a year ago, and it just came out March 26th. And so my brain is kind of off it to a point where maybe it would help if I sat at home and read it, because I don't be remembering, I remember the parts that I read out of it for sure. Like I have like 5 to 6 parts that I read out of it. But beyond that, it's wild. But nah, I'm not at the crib reading my own joints, nah. Yes.
How did you know you were finished?
What They Can't Kill Us Till They Kill Us? The question of completion is a good one, and I think a lot of writers wrestle with it. For me, I simplify. I'm too anxious to get. I simplify it by asking, have I done the best I can do with the tools I have at my disposal right now? And that's a much easier question to answer for me than have I finished this book? Because if I ask the question of like, have I finished this book, I'd be anxious for days, because I don't even know what that looks like in the sense of, have I written about everything I wanted to write about? No, of course not. Have I written everything as perfectly as I could possibly write it? Of course not. But to say I've done the best I can with the tools I have right now, knowing that every time I sit down to write, I have a new tool set that emerges, even in a little way, that's an easier question for me to answer. And so I got to a point with this book, especially because this book was nonlinear. I wrote a bunch of these essays and then arranged them as they were. And the last essay I wrote was Defiance, Ohio is the name of a band. And when I finished that, I felt so good about that piece. And I thought, I'm at a level where if I were to say, I feel good about this, I feel so good about this piece and I want to feel that way about every single thing I've written, I would dismantle the book and start it over again. And it's not useful. That's not a useful thing, right? And so I like to end on a high note. I like to end in a place where I say, I feel as good about that as I felt about anything I've written, because that doesn't mean I need to rewire this book. It means that the next book, I'm jumping from a trampoline into whatever the next book can be. Yeah. Yes. Oh, I treated it like an album. I feel like I treated it like a series of, like how thematically there's themes, but also I wanted to treat it like an album. I wanted people to be surprised. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, structure in books is important. It's important to arrange them in a certain way. Yeah. Yes. I mean, yeah, for sure. That I would take out. Ooh, that's a greater question, because I think a lot of this stuff I would change. But take out, I like that question, because people don't usually ask that. People usually ask like, what would you change? I think I would take out the Chance the Rapper piece. I would take it out, I think. Because I don't know if I could change it the way I want to change it to. I would take that out. I would maybe take out the 21 Pilots piece. I feel like I could and be fine with that. And I would take out the cute is what we aim for piece, because I don't think I did enough analysis of that. I think I was just kind of trying to, sometimes like a kid does a bad thing, you slap their hand. I think I was just trying to like slap the hand of that band and not really analyze anything beyond that slapping. So I'd probably take those 3 out. Yeah. What do I think readers will take out of it, and how do I think it'll impact their understanding of how music has an impact on society? I am largely divorced and detached from the idea of readers, not in a mean way or a cruel way, but the minute you put something into the world, you can't control how it's received. And so for me, the only way to survive knowing that, is to step back and say, I have no control over how this is received. So I hope that people come to it and therefore take from it whatever they see in it. I hope that it reflects back to them what they most want. Now, in terms of music, I do hope it pushes people to ask real questions of what they're consuming musically, and not to pass judgment or to kind of wag things, but to say, is this music doing more for you than just providing a temporary bit of entertainment? Is this music contextualizing a world for you that you did not understand before you encountered it? Yeah, sometimes I just listen to stuff to listen to it. Of course, we all do. Um, you know, a lot of my running playlists is stuff I just would not listen to it if not running. You know, it's just kind of like, you know, you can only listen to like, you can listen to Future only so many times, you know. But a lot of stuff, there's other stuff in my life musically that has a history to it, has emotional resonance to it. And I think there's a way that I think about this book affording people an opportunity to ask some real questions about how music is moving them, yeah, beyond just like entertainment. Yes. Yeah, do I feel responsible to talk about certain topics or events? No. And in part because I don't ever want to, I want to remain curious. I don't want to preach to people. And I think if I felt a responsibility to cover certain topics, I would turn the page into a pulpit in a way. And I don't know if that is exactly how I want to approach my work, you know? Now, there are of course topics that I orbit in my work that are important to me, but I like to leave myself open to evolve and change and feel, you know, multiple ways about those topics instead of fixing myself to them and having to, you know, sometimes you stake out a position and that's just your position. You know, that's the position that you are beholden to for as long as you are alive and creating things. And I don't know if I feel comfortable staking out any position ever, you know, or I want to stake out a position that can evolve without me. Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry, what musician? Yeah. I don't know if a ton of contemporary critics inspire me. I know Anthony's great, and has definitely built a unique platform. But I wasn't really looking at, you know, at the time, in terms of contemporaries, like in terms of people who were doing that work alongside me, I wasn't really thinking about it. I wasn't really looking at it like that. You know, I wasn't really considering a world wherein I needed to be anything other than who I was trying to be. You know, with criticism, I was really trying to build a voice that was unique to me and that no one else, you know, that sounded like no one else, you know. I was aware of other critics always, and I was aware of what other people were doing. You know, my early criticism was happening in like the blog era, you know, and so everybody had a blog. I had a blog. So all the writers in that kind of cohort of critics who were coming up, they all had blogs, so we all knew what each other were doing, but we weren't really in competition with each other. We were trying to like operate alongside each other as best we could. But yeah, I was trying to build my own unique voice. Yes. Oh, the second edition, yeah. So the second edition has a few new essays, well, not new, but a few essays that were not in this version, the bonus tracks. So I decided quite simply to pick the 3 essays that were not in this book that came out in the window between like 2017 and 2020 that were just the most popular ones that so I think there's the Julian Baker essay. That is just massively, I think that is maybe one of the most popular things I've ever written, so it felt like that had to go in there. There's another Carly Rae Jepsen essay that I just loved, and that I think is a companion piece to the one that's originally in here, so I added that, and I actually forget what the third one was. There's another bonus track, and I forget what it is. Yes, On Summer Crushing. On Summer Crushing is the second most popular thing I've ever written, and so really it was just a matter of popularity. You know, it was a matter of like, there are people who love these pieces, and they should like live in a place, because they didn't get done they were not done by the time this original copy came out, and there was nowhere for them to live, because I'm probably not going to do another essay book that looks like this, and so it gave people an opportunity to have them in text form, because as we know, the internet is not forever, or the internet is sometimes forever, but sometimes definitively not. And I don't even know if that Seatbelts and Sunsets essay is even on the internet anymore. And so I wanted to have it preserved in a place that was good. Yes.
You mentioned that you don't listen to music when you write.
No.
Can you elaborate on
Not a ton. I have I have a writing space. I have a committed writing space that is just my own, and that feels good. I didn't always have that, but to have a kind of structured and committed writing space, it's just like a little desk in a little office, and I have multiple monitors. I have I have like a laptop, a center monitor, and then like a different mode, portrait mode, I guess, monitor, or yeah, portrait, not landscape. That's a big part of my writing process because I like to have multiple things. My brain is all over the place, so I like to have multiple things moving around at once. And I usually, if I'm writing poems, I have a series of poems up on the furthest monitor. I write on the central monitor, and I do research on the laptop monitor. So that's where I have all my tabs of YouTube links and articles. And so, these kind of things help me settle into the writing practice. But in terms of rituals, no. I mean, I just kind of get to the work when I feel like I can get to the work. That's it feels. It's lucky when it happens. It feels lucky when it happens, and I try to ride the wave when it does. Yeah. Yes.
What advice would you give to fellow writers or artists on how to stand firm in their opinions or thoughts without watering them down for the sake of pleasing, or like the disapproval of some readers?
Yeah. I think really detaching yourself from a commitment to audience, because you just cannot. Your audience is, one, going to be varied, and two, by the time your work enters the world, you aren't going to really have control over who that audience is or becomes. And if that allows you to write more freely into your thoughts, feelings, opinions, heart, then that is what you have to do. But I know that's hard. It's hard to say, I am not going to be in consideration of an audience in this way. But I think that's a requirement. It's a requirement. It sharpens all of us, and it is better for your brain too, I think, in the process of making things.
We have another book coming out at 2 o'clock, so give people a chance to spend a little time with something the book before that happens.
Thank you.